Hello there, it's Paul here and welcome all everyone. This video I'm just going to show you how I turned this small oak lidded box. It was originally rough turned back in February and I've also used the Briwax Dark Oak wax on it. If you want to see how I got on with all my comments and everything like that, I'll have a chat at the end of the video. I've got this rough turned box I turned back in February this year. It's oak. It's a piece of wet wood I'd have probably got from my local sawmill. It might even be the video I did when I did the trip to the sawmill, because it's about that time, and something I rough turned probably fairly quickly. Hopefully you can see, I mean, I'll put these at opposites. If that's, I don't know how well you can see, I mean that is flat and it is literally tipped across that way. And if I put the pieces opposite, hopefully you can then see how much they're out. Just literally got my scales out, and I always do put the weights on the pieces so we can see what sort of weight they've lost. This was originally 267.4 when I weighed it, and that now weighs 162 grams. That's lost over 100 grams, that one piece. So that's a good over a third of its weight. This was 181.4. Now down to 108.2, so again a massive loss between the pair of them. I know after I turned them I've just left them here in the shed, so they haven't been bagged up in wet wood shavings or anything like that. Now my biggest problem here with these is that if I use the original tenon on here, because they are so far out, I mean this probably doesn't show so well on the camera here, it will probably show better when I put it on the lathe. If that's flat, this piece is up so much, the actual swing you get on the piece, because it's sort of warped one side to the other, would almost be the thickness of this wall. So my biggest problem at the moment is I now need to redo the tenon to try and true it up so that it's parallel with the sides. Now I'm going to use some form of a jam chuck. You might be able to just see it on the camera here. A piece of pine that I've just put in the lathe. Now I'm not sure how well this will show up on the camera. Hopefully it's going to show up fairly well, because it is fairly wonky. What I've done is I've just wedged it on this piece of pine. The inside hole is not round, so it's not going to be a nice tight fit on there, as in to slide on like you would normally do a jam chuck. So I've had to use the tailstock to bring it up. And fortunately I've got a centre point on this end, and the lid probably has traces of where the centre point is that I can possibly use when I do the lid as well. Now I'll just turn the lathe on. It's really running really slowly here, only about 150, so hopefully you can see now really how wonky this is on the ends. So I'll now just, as I say, get this tenon re-sorted out so that then it can be mounted in the chuck properly. Now hopefully you can see how much this is totally out. I have now trued up both the tenons so that at least they're parallel with the sides. Now I prefer to do the lid first rather than the base, and that's purely and simply because once you finish all this bottom of the lid off and everything, doing your mortise or tenon, doesn't matter which way around it is, when you then do your base you can do the same sort of things inside, do your mortise and tenon, and then put your lid on top, and then you can finish off the top of the lid. If you do the base first of all, you can cut everything. You've then got to make the lid fit the base, and then you're then going to have to then end up putting the base back into the chuck again. So I just find it more logical for me to do the lid first. The first thing I'm going to do here is just true off this bottom face, sort out the inside, and then just try and true up the outside a little bit. Probably won't be anything to finish size because I don't know what I'm going to do for shape wise yet. Now the eagle-eyed of you may have noticed that my lid has become a little bit shorter, and that's because I actually had a bit of chip out on it, and as you can see it's going to be very, very close to where the mortise is, which would have meant the walls would have had to been a lot thinner. So I just thought the easiest thing to do, just take the top off, reduce the height of the lid, don't hollow out too much the inside, so that it will just probably be a fairly thin lid on the top. My next thing is I will now get all the inside of this sanded up. I will then probably give it some sanding sealer, possibly Yorkshire grit, and as I said, for wax wise I think I'm going to go for the Briwax. This is the Dark Oak one, so it will really fill out the grain and give it that really aged look. I've sanded this up from just basically 180 and 240, and then I've given it Yorkshire grit. There's various ways you can apply this, but I found, to be honest, the best way, it's a little bit messy, is to use a bit of 0000 wire wool and literally rub it all in. Let's say it can be messy. The trouble is as well, the warmer it is as well, the worse this is, because when you get over 20 degrees it turns into a liquid, which is like it's doing there. And I'll just let that fully dry now. I've found that you don't need to buff this so hard and so fast as you do with a lot of waxes. So for example, whether it be wood wax 22 or a microcrystalline wax, often you'd have the lathe on, maybe 1000 RPM, and then really buff it in. And I've found that if you do that with this, you just end up really with splodges of wax everywhere, or just taking it all off. So you're better off probably having about 500 RPM, slowly buff it in, and then if you want to build it up, you can add more coats, which will make it thicker and more of a shine. So just less that a couple of minutes. I mean, it's still a bit probably thick on the inside there, where I've just probably put a bit too much. And I'm just going to run the lathe here 500, which is what's the minimum speed on a lot of lathes. So just gently buffing this in. So you can see a lot of it comes all off on the cloth. I'll just stop that a sec so you can just see. So hopefully you can see it's really gone into the grain which was white before. And that's already starting to get a bit of a shine to it. I gave this 2 coats of the wax in the end, and hopefully you can see on this now it's got a nice sheen to it. It's not a high gloss or anything like that, and that's just a really nice finish. So we've got the dark areas for where the wax has got into the grains. There are still some white areas with the grain, but that's because the grain is flat there with the wood, so there's nothing for the wax to sort of sink into. But all these other areas that go across here, it's got all that dark. Now I've got the base on the lathe now. Hopefully you can see that how misshaped this is. It's really high on this bit here and low on this bit here, which is again why I had to true up the tenon on the bottom there. So I'm going to probably true up the inside first of all. I might even off the top a little bit, but I don't want to take too much off the top, because as I found out with when I did the lid, it's quite easy to get some chip out with this. It's really dry and brittle now. So I've now got a nice suction fit on there. The tenon on this is probably a little bit thinner than I'd have preferred, and the reason the tenon's so small here is because I had to true up this inside, so it then made the walls more even overall. But I suppose this is another good example. Maybe not rush and finish the lid off first, because had I trued up both of these insides first of all, I would have then been able to realise how much of a wall thickness I've got here. I could have made that tenon a little bit thicker, and also just made the mortise on here a little bit larger as well, which would have evened the whole thing out. So the next thing I'm going to do is just sand up all the inside and finish that off. I've sanded this to 240 sanding sealer, Yorkshire grit, and then this has just had a couple of coats of wax. And hopefully you can see on here now that because the grain is now in a slightly different orientation, because we're in a spindle mode now rather than more of the end grain, you can see where the wax has really gone in. Now, one lesson I've learned over the years is when you've done your tenon, or whether it be the mortise, whatever it is for your box lid, when you have a nice fit, keep the sandpaper well away from it. It only takes a touch of sanding on this mortise to change it. So even though it's got a good fit on there, just going to bring up the tailstock. So I shall now shape all this, and I shall probably use the skew for a lot of this, and it's going to be fairly straight and just curved over the top. Maybe use a spindle gauge for that. I've just gone for a really sort of basic shape. I'm just going to sand this up, sanding sealer, Yorkshire grit, and then do the wax again. Now it's been sanded to 240 again, sanding sealer, Yorkshire grit, which as usual has done an amazing job. Gives a really good base and a nice finish for the final finish to go on. Had to resort to another piece of wire wool because my other piece is sort of disintegrated. And just by rubbing in like this, the good thing about Briwax is if it's more or less room temperature, it does go on nicely like this. The key is to not put too much on, because it will become very blotchy. And it's best to probably put two or three coats on, just building it up slowly, than putting too much on all at once. Just got the lathe on about 600 there, and hopefully you can see that shine straight away. And this is just one coat, just very subtle at the moment where it's gone into the grain. It's got a really nice shine to it. Like I say, it's not a really high gloss shine, it's more of a sheen. So hopefully you can see like there with the crack, it's just filled that, which is slowly filling the grain on here as well. Just gives it that much more of an aged look. Looks like we've got some little cracks in there as well. So I'll give this another, just let this cool down a bit, give this another 1 or 2 coats, and I'll part it off. And this box was really out of shape when I first started on this. Had to redo the tenons on both ends, because otherwise it was so tipped from where it had sort of like expanded on one side rather than the other, that I probably wouldn't have had thick enough walls to actually finish this box off. Inside, the lid wasn't too bad. I did have a little bit of a chip out on the top, so I just then used the parting tool to take that part off, and then just redid the mortise on there. Other than that, the lid, absolutely no problems whatsoever. It fits nicely, especially when I did the base of the box. Probably it's one of those things you learn as you go along. I mean, you should know by now, not every job is always the same. You have your own routine when you do these things. I mean, I always usually prefer to finish off all the inside of the lid first of all before I do the base, because then at least that way you usually leave the base in the chuck until you've literally finished. But because of the actual wall sizes and stuff like that, it meant I've got to have a fairly small sort of thin tenon on the actual base, which I mean, it's worked out quite well actually, but you certainly wouldn't want that any smaller. I mean, that's probably about 2 mil thick. Now the main issue I really probably had with this is because the wood was so dry and hard, as the chip out it was getting, skew, it was just unbelievable. I couldn't get a very good finish on the outside with the skew whatsoever, and in the end had to just resort to the spindle gouge just to take it on that final passes. Now the Briwax I do really like. It's the Dark Oak one, which I use every now and then, and it goes into the grain, so what was really a light piece of wood now looks more of an aged piece of wood. So a nice little box. I mean, it's really got, to be honest, the perfect fit on there. The pop on there and the snap when it goes back on is probably one of the best I've ever done. Thanks a lot for watching.